In this video, we are going to be exploring the visual documentation of Yosemite National Park, located in Central California. Now, visual documentation refers to the paintings, the photography, and the drawing done of Yosemite National Park throughout the years. When we look at the visual documentation of Yosemite, there's three major themes it reveals about California culture, and that is the myth versus the reality of California, the westward expansion, and land and resources in California. Now we're going to come back to these themes in a second, but first, let's look at our timeline. In 1855, the artist Thomas Aries, here this is my own artist rendition of him because there is no photographs of him. So Thomas Aries joined James Hutchins on a trip to Yosemite, and on this trip, their goal was for Thomas to make drawings that James could use in his magazine entitled Hutchins Illustrated California Magazine. Hutchins' goal was to attract immigrants to California and to make money from his publications. Together, they created the first renderings of Yosemite to be widely published to the public. Pictured here, we have Aries' first drawing of Yosemite. And again, this was in 1855. This is the first widely published drawing of Yosemite, though it is most likely not the first artwork to be created of Yosemite. Now, when we jump over to 1861, we have the photographer Carleton Watkins. He arrived in Yosemite in 1861, lugging with him all of his photography equipment, which back then was a feat on its own. He captured many popular images of the Yosemite Valley, and by 1862, he had published these images in a gallery in New York. Today, he's considered one of the most highly acclaimed early Western photographers. Here you can see two of his works. On the left, picturing Cathedral Rock, and of course, Yosemite Falls on the right. By 1863, the painter Albert Bierstadt, who was originally from Germany, made his way to Yosemite. Bierstadt was part of a group of painters called the Hudson River School. These artists often created landscapes that were extremely romanticized. They got their names since many began by creating works of the Hudson River in New York. Bierstadt created many popular paintings of Yosemite Valley, including Cho Look, the Yosemite Fall, pictured right here. This painting is actually displayed in a museum in my local hometown, San Diego, and I would have gone and taken a photo with it for you guys, but the museum is under construction right now. But I have seen it myself in person, and it is quite impressive. Bierstadt created many paintings of Yosemite from 1863 to 1866. All of them show grand landscapes with little to no people, lush nature, and have a glamorized tone to them. One of his most famous paintings and most recognizable is among the Sierra Nevada, California, painted in 1868. In 1864, our old pal Carleton Watkins, his photos reached Lincoln in Washington, D.C. Although the United States had been in the Civil War since 1861, President Lincoln stopped from the war to create a bill to declare Yosemite a protected land forever. It's believed that Senator John Conness is the one who showed his collection of Carleton Watkins photos to the president, which inspired Lincoln to create this law. Now we're going to pause from our timeline, get that out of the way for a moment here, and we're going to bring back our themes. All right, so theme number 1 is the myth versus reality of California. Myth versus reality essentially means that when we romanticize a place such as California, it creates a myth about it, often leaving out the realities of the place. Today, in current present day California, we think of how people might move here for Hollywood, for the nature, for the belief that there's opportunity. But the reality that they are not maybe ready for is that there's also lots of traffic, lots of people, smog and pollution, and it's quite expensive to live in California. Now, in the mid 1800s, the myth was that California was a vast wilderness, ready to be explored, uninhabited by the people, a new place to start fresh. But the reality is that there had been people living there for thousands of years. With developed civilizations, trade routes, and a sustainable way of life. In Yosemite specifically, it was the Awenatchee people, who are part of the Miwok people. They'd been living there for approximately 8,000 years. But today they've been forced out and live in nearby counties or scattered throughout the world. So how was this myth widely spread? Well, in most of the paintings, photos, and drawings of Yosemite, there were no people included. Most of the documentation that we looked at today was widely publicized and only showed the nature and not the people that had been living there for thousands of years. I did find one exception to this, and that is in one of Albert Bierstadt's paintings. It is called Mariposa Indian Encampment, Yosemite Valley, California, 1872. But this piece was a rarity and created in 1870s as opposed to the 1850s and 60s, which is what we're focusing on in this story. The myth of California also plays a large role into our second theme, as it heavily influenced westward expansion. So theme number 2 is westward expansion. All of the photos and paintings that we just learned about show a vast wilderness. It is awe-inspiring. The painters use vivid colors and feathery brushstrokes to create a dreamlike landscape, while the photographers are extremely technical and advanced for their time. When these photos and paintings reach the East Coast, it inspires hundreds of mostly white Americans to pack up and move west. This large-scale migration is referred to as westward expansion and created the belief in manifest destiny. All these things contribute to the ideology of opportunity in the West, a common theme that can still be seen today. Now let's go back to our timeline. So with the United States focus on the West and moving west to California, one very important person's interest is sparked, and that would be President Theodore Roosevelt, otherwise known as TR. Now, he met up with John Muir, the author, geologist, and environmentalist. They went on a trip to Yosemite in May of 1903. It's believed that on this trip, the men discussed the importance of conservation. Roosevelt was taken aback by the beauty of Yosemite, and throughout his presidency, Roosevelt ended up establishing about 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, and 4 national game preserves. He went on to continue to do much more conservation work throughout his presidency, and without Roosevelt's support and legislation, it's likely that much of the protected lands in California and throughout the United States wouldn't be here today. And now we're going to go back to our third and final theme once we put our timeline out of the way here. The third and final theme is land and resources. For one of the first times in California history, we see a government effort to protect the land. Native Americans had been doing this for many years, but without these efforts from the white American government, it's likely that places like Yosemite would have been irreplaceably destroyed and used for resources and development like many other parts of California. It's a rare time when we can talk about preservation and not the exploitation of land. Today, hashtag Yosemite has 3.2 million tags on Instagram. The legacy of sharing these images of Yosemite and many other national parks lives on. We went from paintings to hashtags, and yet both still romanticize California and inspire others to travel. Influencers use these images to show how in touch they are with nature and how adventurous they are. But is it a facade or is it true? By examining visual documentation of Yosemite, we learn the stories behind the photos, paintings, and drawings. We learn beyond what the image tells us. That California will likely always have a romanticized myth about it, that it inspires people to travel here, and that we need to continue to conserve the land and learn the history of the land we live on before contact. Thank you for sticking around and learning with me all about the visual documentation of Yosemite National Forest.